Be Me Kim, 43. My life isn't what I thought it would be. Not even close. Every morning starts with the same low-grade hum of anxiety. The alarm goes off at 6:30 a.m. It's a jarring digital sound that feels like a personal attack. I hit snooze. Twice? Always twice. The first thing I smell is the cat litter box. We have 2 cats, Milo and Cleo. I love them. But that smell. It's the official scent of my apartment. My roommate, Jade, is usually already up, drinking some kind of green sludge she calls a smoothie. She's also in her early 40s. We met years ago at a protest. Now we share a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that costs way too much. Our walls are covered in faded posters from marches and rallies. The future is female. A woman's place is in the revolution. They feel less like declarations and more like relics from a different person's life. I work from home. My job is a soul-crushing gig at a non-profit's call center. I put on a headset and spend 8 hours a day asking for donations to help empower women in developing countries. The irony is a constant bitter taste in my mouth. I'm reading a script about empowerment while my own bank account is a joke. My boss, a woman 10 years younger than me who uses words like synergy and impactfulness, sends emails with passive-aggressive smiley faces. Last week's email was about my suboptimal performance metrics. I spend my lunch break scrolling through social media. I see pictures of old friends from college. There's Sarah with her husband and 2 kids on a beach vacation. She looks happy, relaxed. We used to be inseparable, chanting slogans together. Then she met a guy, an engineer. We drifted apart. I told Jade she'd been absorbed by the patriarchy. There's another acquaintance posing in front of a house they just bought, a real house with a yard. I look around my living room. A stack of bills sits on the coffee table next to a half-eaten bag of vegan chips. Cleo is meticulously cleaning herself on a pile of laundry I was supposed to do 3 days ago. This isn't empowerment. This is stagnation. The evenings are the worst. Jade and I usually order takeout because we're both too exhausted to cook. We watch shows with strong female leads who are always impeccably dressed CEOs or brilliant detectives. Jade will point at the screen and say something like, "See? We don't need men to be happy." And I'll nod, but the word happy echoes in the quiet apartment. Am I happy? The loneliness is the heaviest part. It's a physical weight. I remember being 25, full of fire and certainty. I thought I was on the front lines of a great battle. I cut off friendships with men who made the wrong kind of jokes. I argued with my family during holidays. I believed I was changing the world. The world kept turning, but my own life ground to a halt. The breaking point came a few weeks ago. It was a Tuesday, I think. The electricity bill arrived. It was higher than expected, way higher. I did the math. After rent, utilities, cat food, and my own meager grocery bill, I'd have almost nothing left until my next paycheck. A cold panic seized me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the utter lack of a safety net. If I got sick, if my laptop died, if the rent went up, I was completely, totally on my own. Jade came into the room and saw the look on my face. She launched into her usual speech about the systemic injustices of late-stage capitalism and the gender pay gap. I just stared at her. Her words, which used to comfort me, now sounded like hollow excuses. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the city sounds outside my window. For the first time in over a decade, I allowed myself to think the forbidden thought. I need help. I don't want to do this alone anymore. The thought was so powerful, it felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for, but it was also the truest thing I'd felt in years. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, went to the App Store, and downloaded Tinder. Creating the profile was an exercise in self-deception. I scrolled through hundreds of photos, looking for one that didn't show the exhaustion in my eyes. I settled on one from 2 years ago at a climate march. I looked passionate, younger. For the bio, I tried to sound like myself, but better, more appealing. Passionate advocate for social justice, lover of cats, documentary films, and meaningful conversation, seeking a partner who is kind, intelligent, and an ally. I stared at the word ally. It felt so clinical, so performative. I swiped for an hour. It was a digital parade of male archetypes. Men holding fish, men flexing in gym mirrors, men in sunglasses posing in front of cars that probably weren't theirs. My thumb got tired. My heart sank. Then I got a few matches, a little dopamine hit, a flicker of hope. I decided to be proactive. I was a strong, independent woman after all. I set up 3 dates for the following week, a full-on assault on my loneliness. The first was with a guy named Lewis. His profile was simple. 45, divorced, worked in IT. A few pictures of him smiling awkwardly on a hiking trail. No red flags, no political slogans, just normal. We agreed to meet at a quiet pub downtown. Not too fancy, not a dive. I spent an hour getting ready, which was more effort than I'd put into my appearance in months. I felt a strange mix of hope and dread. I got to the pub first and picked a booth in the corner. Louis arrived a few minutes later. He looked exactly like his pictures, a bit tired around the eyes, wearing a clean but unremarkable button-down shirt. He smiled, a genuine nervous smile. "Kim, hi, I'm Louis." The first 20 minutes were fine, awkward but fine. He asked about my work. I gave him the sanitized version about helping people. He talked about his job, something about managing servers. It was boring, but he seemed passionate enough about it. He mentioned his son was in college, studying business. Then he made a critical mistake. He asked me what I was passionate about outside of work. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. This was my chance to vet him, to see if he was worthy. I started talking about my activism, the marches against toxic masculinity, the volunteer work for women's shelters, the endless fight against the patriarchy. I watched his face closely for any sign of disagreement. He just nodded. Wow, that's really admirable. But his tone was off. It wasn't impressed. It was the tone you use when a child tells you a long, complicated story about their imaginary friend. This wasn't good enough. I needed to dig deeper. I asked him, "So, would you consider yourself a feminist?" He shifted in his seat, a classic sign of male discomfort. He took a slow sip of his beer. "I don't know about labels. I just try to treat everyone with respect. My mom raised me to be a gentleman." "A gentleman?" The word felt archaic, condescending. You know, the concept of chivalry is rooted in the idea that women are weak and need protecting. He blinked. "Oh, I never thought of it that way. I just meant being polite." The floodgates were open. I launched into a full-blown lecture. I talked about benevolent sexism, emotional labor, the mental load that women carry in relationships. I explained how men like him, the good guys, were often the most dangerous because their inaction allowed the system of oppression to continue. His face was a blank canvas. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't defending himself. He was just listening. Or maybe he wasn't. His eyes had a far-off look. I was getting louder. A couple at the next table glanced over. I felt a surge of self-righteousness. I was speaking truth to power, right here in this pub. When I finally paused to take a breath, there was a long silence. He looked down at his watch. "Well, Kim," he said, his voice perfectly even, "it's been an interesting chat, but I have an early start tomorrow." He pulled out his wallet and put a $20 bill on the table. "That should cover my beer. It was nice to meet you." And just like that, he stood up and walked away. No argument, no apology, no emotional reaction at all. He just left. I sat there, stunned, my half-finished glass of wine in front of me. My brain scrambled to process what had happened. He couldn't handle a strong, opinionated woman. His male fragility couldn't take it. I pulled out my phone and texted Jade. Date was a disaster. He was a textbook example of a fragile misogynist. Couldn't handle hearing the truth. Jade replied almost instantly. Ugh, they're all the same. Don't worry his loss. We're better off without them. Her words should have been comforting, but they felt hollow. His quiet, calm departure felt less like a retreat and more like a verdict. He wasn't intimidated. He was just uninterested. The second date was a few days later, on a Thursday. This guy, Rodney, was the complete opposite of Louis, at least on paper. His profile was a checklist of modern progressive ideals. He had his pronouns in his bio, he, him. He had a picture of himself at a pride parade. His anthem was some obscure indie song with lyrics about social change. He was 38, worked as a graphic designer for a conscious brand. He was the ally I was looking for. This had to be better. He suggested a trendy vegan cafe. Of course. I arrived to find him already there, sipping a matcha latte. He was thin, with floppy hair and big, earnest eyes. He was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Smash the System." He stood up to greet me with an awkward side hug. "Kim, it's so amazing to finally meet you in person. I was so inspired by your profile." The conversation was easy, too easy. He agreed with everything I said, often finishing my sentences for me. I'd say something about the patriarchy, and he'd nod vigorously and add a comment about intersectionality. I mentioned toxic masculinity, and he launched into a story about how he's actively working to deconstruct his own ingrained biases. He told me he cried during the latest superhero movie because of its powerful female character arc. It felt like I was talking to a gender studies textbook. There was no friction, no debate, no challenge. He was a human echo chamber. At first, it was validating. See? I thought. There are good men out there. But as the date went on, a strange feeling started to creep in. A feeling of annoyance. The moment of clarity came when our food arrived. The waiter, a young kid who looked overwhelmed, brought our orders. He'd mixed them up. He gave me Rodney's tofu scramble and Rodney my avocado toast. A simple mistake. I looked at Rodney, expecting him to handle it, to politely call the waiter back and get it sorted. That's what a partner would do, right? Share the load. Instead, he just stared at the plate in front of him with wide, panicked eyes. He looked over at me, his expression helpless. Oh, he got the order wrong. What should we do? His voice was soft, almost a whisper. He seemed genuinely afraid of creating a conflict. I waited a beat, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. A wave of irritation washed over me, so sharp and sudden it surprised me. I sighed, a heavy, weary sigh. "Excuse me?" I called out, flagging down the waiter. My voice was firm but polite. The waiter hurried over, apologized profusely, and swapped the plates. The whole interaction took less than 15 seconds. When I turned back to Rodney, he was looking at me with pure, unadulterated admiration. "Wow," he breathed. "You're so good at that, so assertive. I could never." And in that moment, I felt a profound sense of revulsion. The ick, as the kids call it. He wasn't my ally. He wasn't my partner. He was another person I would have to take care of, another child. He had deconstructed his masculinity so thoroughly that there was nothing left. No strength, no initiative, no backbone. Just a quivering mass of apologies and right-think. I suddenly pictured my life with him. Me, making all the difficult phone calls, dealing with the landlord, killing the spiders. Him, standing on the sidelines, telling me how brave I was. The image was nauseating. I pushed my avocado toast around my plate, my appetite gone. I realized I didn't want a man who agreed with everything I said. I wanted a man who could handle a simple food mix-up at a cafe. The two desires seemed to be mutually exclusive. I cut the date short. I feigned a sudden migraine. Rodney was instantly concerned, asking if I needed him to call me a car, if I had eco-friendly pain relievers, if my migraine was a psychosomatic manifestation of patriarchal oppression. I almost screamed. "I'm fine," I said through gritted teeth. "I just need to go home." I walked out of the vegan cafe and into the cool night air. I had just rejected the perfect progressive man, the man my younger self would have dreamed of, and it felt like a relief. But it also left me with a terrifying question. If I didn't want the problematic normal guy, and I didn't want the perfect ally, what in the world did I want? I got home feeling more confused than ever. Jade was on the couch, of course. "How was the woke wonder?" she asked without looking up from her laptop. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I couldn't admit that his spinelessness disgusted me. That would be admitting that I craved some of those toxic masculine traits I'd been fighting against my whole life. So I just mumbled, "No spark," and went to my room. I had one date left. A guy named Kurt. I opened the app to look at his profile again. It was almost aggressively minimalist. He was 40, 3 photos. One was a headshot where he wasn't smiling. Another was him standing on a construction site, arms crossed, looking impatient. The third was a blurry shot of him on a boat. His bio was 5 words. "No drama, know what I want." I had swiped right on him in a fit of nihilism after the date with Lewis. He seemed like everything I was supposed to despise. He was probably one of those guys who complained about snowflakes. He'd matched with me instantly and sent a one-word message. "Drinks?" We were scheduled to meet the next night. A huge part of me wanted to cancel, to just delete the app, get into my pajamas, and accept my fate as a cat lady. But another part of me, a stubborn, self-destructive part, was curious. I had faced the fragile misogynist and the performative ally. Now it was time to face the final boss. I spent most of the next day in a state of low-level dread. The thought of going on this date with Kurt was exhausting. Part of me was hoping he'd cancel. He seemed like the type, impatient, busy. But my phone remained silent. So at 7 p.m., I found myself standing in front of my closet, feeling like I was choosing armor for a battle I was destined to lose. What do you even wear to meet a man whose entire profile screams, "I eat steak and don't care about your feelings"? Everything I owned suddenly felt wrong. Too political, too soft, too old. I settled on a plain black top and jeans. Anonymity, my urban camouflage. Jade saw me getting ready. "Another date? You're a machine. Don't let the bastards grind you down." I gave her a weak smile. Her revolutionary slogans were starting to sound like motivational posters in a failing office. He had chosen a steakhouse, a real one. Dark wood, leather booths, the faint, expensive smell of grilled meat in the air. It was the kind of place my friends and I used to protest. I felt deeply out of place, like an undercover agent whose cover was about to be blown. He was already there, sitting in a booth, looking at his phone. He was bigger in person. Not fat, but solid. Broad shoulders, thick hands. He wore a simple, well-fitting polo shirt that probably cost more than my electricity bill. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes were appraising. He wasn't looking at me like a potential partner. He was looking at me like a mechanic inspects a used car. "Kim?" he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep and steady. "You're on time. I like that. Sit down." He didn't stand up. A waiter appeared instantly, as if summoned by magic. "We'll start with a bottle of the Malbec," Kurt said to the waiter, not even glancing at the wine list. Then he looked at me. "You drink red, right?" I just nodded, thrown off balance. The question felt like a test I hadn't studied for. The initial small talk was more like an interrogation. He drove the conversation with blunt, direct questions. So, call center work. Is that a career or a stopgap? What do you do for fun? Besides the activism stuff I read on your profile, are you a city person? Or do you ever get out? I tried to steer the conversation back to familiar territory, to the things I knew. I needed to get him on the defensive, to establish my moral high ground. I brought up a recent political event, expecting him to have some boorish, uneducated opinion I could dismantle. He just shrugged. I don't follow that stuff too closely. Too much noise. I'm focused on my business. The wine arrived. The waiter poured. Kurt took a sip, nodded his approval, and then got straight to the point. Look, Kim, I'm 40. I'm busy. I don't have time to waste going on dozens of dates. So let's just be honest. What are you actually looking for? The directness was disarming. I'm looking for a partner, I said, the words sounding rehearsed even to my own ears. Someone to share my life with, an equal. He leaned back in the booth, a small, knowing smile on his face. It wasn't a kind smile. An equal, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Okay, let's talk about that. The food arrived. He had ordered a massive steak for himself. The waiter placed a sensible salmon dish in front of me, which I hadn't ordered but didn't have the courage to correct. He cut into his steak with practiced ease. From what I gathered from your profile and our little chat just now, he began, chewing thoughtfully. You spent your 20s and 30s fighting. You were at protests. You were angry about the system. You were fighting against men like me. Men who build things, who run businesses, who are ambitious. I opened my mouth to object, to say it was more nuanced than that. He held up a hand, a fork in it. Let me finish. I closed my mouth. So, you dedicated the best years of your life, your peak years, to a war against the patriarchy. You saw traditional relationships as a trap, family as an oppressive institution, and masculinity as something toxic that needed to be dismantled. He took another bite of steak. And now? Now you're 43. The fire is mostly gone, replaced by, what? Tiredness? You're working a job you don't like for not enough money. You're worried about your future. And you've decided you want a partner, an equal. But what you're really looking for is a man, a successful, stable man. A man like the ones you spent 2 decades telling everyone you didn't need. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. My face felt hot. My heart was pounding. That's not true, I managed to say, my voice thin. I don't regret my principles. He actually laughed, a short, sharp, humorless laugh. Principles are a luxury, Kim. They don't pay the rent. Let's look at this like a business proposal. That's what a partnership is, at its core, a deal. You're coming to the negotiating table. What are you bringing? I stared at him, speechless. Let me tell you what I see, he continued, his voice dropping to a calm, clinical tone. I see a woman in her 40s, past her prime childbearing years, which is a biological reality, whether you like it or not. I see a woman with a low-paying job and no significant assets, and I see a woman who carries a massive amount of ideological baggage that views me, my ambition, and my very nature as inherently problematic. He gestured around the restaurant. On the other hand, what do I bring? I bring success, stability, resources, protection, the very things your movement taught you to despise, but which you now secretly crave because you're realizing life is hard and scary when you're alone. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. There was no anger in them, just a chilling, pragmatic clarity. So here's my question, Kim. From a purely logical, transactional standpoint, why would I choose you? Why would I invest in you? The word invest hung in the air between us. I can go on this same app and find a 28-year-old, a woman who is still optimistic, a woman who doesn't see a relationship as a political battlefield, a woman who would be grateful for the life I can provide and who would be a genuine partner, not a critic or a reformer, a woman who looks at me and sees a man, not a walking personification of the patriarchy. He sat back, wiping his mouth with a napkin. You and your friends, you made your choice. You chose the revolution. You chose the ideology. And that's fine. But the revolution doesn't keep you warm at night. The ideology doesn't help you when your car breaks down. You were sold a fantasy, and you bought it. The fantasy that you could have it all on your own terms, without making any compromises. The fantasy that men would just wait around, and that when you were finally ready for one, the best ones would still be available and eager to sign up for a lifetime of being told they're the problem. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I was trying so hard to hold them back. This wasn't an argument. It was a dissection. He was taking my entire life, my entire belief system, and laying it out on the table like a failed science experiment. You lost, Kim, he said, his voice softer now, almost pitying. And that was the worst part. You played the game by a set of rules that don't work in the real world, and now you're discovering that there are consequences. Your principles have left you with a roommate, 2 cats, and a pile of bills. My ambition has left me with a successful business and the freedom to choose. Who do you think made the better bet? He signaled for the check. I just sat there, frozen. My salmon was untouched. I couldn't have swallowed if I tried. He paid the bill in cash, leaving a generous tip. The dinner is on me, he said as he stood up, putting on his jacket. Consider it a donation to a failed cause. And with that, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me alone in the booth. I don't know how long I sat there. The waiter eventually came and cleared my plate, giving me a look of gentle concern. I finally got up and walked out into the night. The city was alive. Cars were rushing past. People were laughing as they walked out of bars and theaters. I saw couples holding hands, a young family with a stroller. It was like I was seeing the world through a different lens. All these people, they were just living. They weren't fighting a war. They weren't deconstructing anything. They were building lives. They were making compromises. They were finding happiness in the simple, problematic structures I had spent my life trying to tear down. My walk home felt like a pilgrimage through the ruins of my own making. Every step was heavy. When I finally got to my apartment building, I felt 100 years old. I opened the door and the smell hit me first, the familiar cloying scent of the litter box, the smell of my life. Jade was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching some historical drama about a queen who defied her male advisors. She looked up as I came in, her face bright with righteous solidarity. So, how was it? Let me guess, another fragile man-child who couldn't handle a strong woman? I looked at her, her messy bun, the faded protest shirt she wore as pajamas, the smug certainty on her face. It was like looking in a mirror, a distorted funhouse mirror that showed me not just my present, but my future. A future of shared takeout, righteous complaints, and growing old with only cats and faded slogans for company. In the past, I would have agreed with her. We would have spent the next hour dissecting the man's flaws, reinforcing our shared worldview, reassuring each other that we were right and the world was wrong. But I couldn't do it. Not tonight. The words wouldn't come out. I just stood there in the doorway, the sound of the TV filling the silence. She was still looking at me, waiting. Kim? I didn't answer. I walked past her, went into my bedroom, and quietly closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the dark. The silence was absolute. Kurt's words echoed in my head. You lost. And in the quiet of my small room, with the scent of cats and regret in the air, I finally admitted the truth to myself. He was right. My whole life, I thought I was fighting the enemy. TFW, you finally realize the enemy was you.